Havel Center for East European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies here at Miami University. The center is located right across the hallway here. And I also want to give thanks to the co-sponsor of this event, the Department of Media, Journalism, and Film, thanks to the Diana Stark Speaker Series Fund, and particularly the chair of Media, Journalism, and Film, Rosemary Pennington, who's over here. Thank you very much. And thank you, Diana Stark and Walter Havinghurst. I'm going to introduce our speaker, Maksym Butkevych, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what's going to happen in the next hour. Maksym Butkevych is a Ukrainian journalist and human rights advocate. He has also been a participant in, and indeed a driving force behind, the major events Ukraine has experienced since the end of the Soviet Union. As a teenager, I found out today, I was going to say student, a student in the more pure sense, a 13-year-old, in Kyiv, he took part in the Revolution on Granite protest held in October 1990 on what is now Maidan Square, and was then called the Square of the October Revolution. After Ukraine gained its independence in 1991, he was a prominent activist in Direct Action, an independent leftist trade union. By the end of the 1990s, having finished with his schooling, and into the early 2000s, Maksym became a journalist, working for independent Ukrainian television stations before becoming a reporter for the BBC World Service. He also became a prominent human rights advocate in his home country, particularly after the Orange Revolution in Kyiv, also held on Maidan Square, when he co-founded No Borders, which dealt with the right to asylum, refugee rights, and internally displaced persons, the Zmina Human Rights Centre, which aims to support human rights and civil society through its expressed values of freedom, independence, informality, and creativity, and Hromadske Radio, a non-governmental independent radio station that played a major role in broadcasting truthful news during the 2013-2014 Maidan Revolution on Maidan Square. Despite his lifelong pacifism, Maksym volunteered for the Ukrainian Armed Forces at the start of the 2022 Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine and became a platoon commander. He was captured by Russian forces and sentenced on trumped-up charges to 13 years in prison. He endured over 2 years of harsh imprisonment before being released in a prisoner exchange in October 2024. More recently, in September 2025, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe awarded Maksym the Václav Havel Prize. It's named after the famed Czech dissident, and it's given to a person who has had a significant impact on human rights. Certainly, Maksym Butkevych has had that impact. Maksym's going to speak for about 15 or 20 minutes or so, and then I'll ask him a couple questions to get a conversation going, and then we'll open the floor to you all so that you can ask him questions. Before he gets up and speak, please join me in welcoming Maksym Butkevych to Miami.
Thank you very much. It's not easy to say anything after such an introduction. I'm really humbled, and thank you very much for coming. I haven't got the loudest voice, as you can hear. And also I still have some, not many, but still some prison habits. One of them is to speak in low voice. So if I speak for longer, I tend to start to speak like calmer. So please, if you don't hear something or I'm not clear enough, make a noise and I'll try to fix it. I nowadays don't deliver lectures or something of this sort. I don't really write it down. When I start doing this, it usually comes out boring. So normally it's total improvisation. But after this introduction, what I wanted to say, probably just a few words before we switch into conversational mode. As it's been mentioned, I worked as a journalist for many years of my life, but for more than 15 years of my life before the Russian full-scale invasion, my main preoccupation and the core of all my lifetime activities were human rights. I worked with those who had to flee their home countries due to persecution on political, religious grounds, belonging to certain social or ethnic group. Then when Russia launched its war against Ukraine in 2014 with the occupation of Crimea and war in the east of the country, we started to help internally displaced persons, those who had to flee occupation and fighting in the combat zones. So unfortunately for several years we had to make it our primary focus. I worked with issues of discrimination and xenophobia and racism And also I was interested and tried to contribute to an extent possible to efforts on prevention of torture, inhuman and degrading treatment, trying to advocate for freedom of expression and freedom of peaceful assemblies. I didn't know at the time that some of those things I will be able to explore from the other end when the time came, because when Russia launched its full-scale invasion into Ukraine in February of 2022, I joined the armed forces. When I was liberated already, I learned with a bit of surprise that I was called a pacifist by many people. Actually, I didn't call myself a pacifist, but it's all a matter of definition. I was definitely anti-militarist. I didn't have any military experience before that, any military service or living aside combat experience. But that decision to join the armed forces on the very first day of the Russian full-scale invasion, I went to the military station. It came natural for a number of reasons. Of course, it was because I'm a Ukrainian, it's part of my identity, and I never wanted to see Ukraine being subjugated by Russia or anyone else, for that matter. I treasured life of my loved ones, of my relatives, my family, my colleagues, my friends, and they needed to be protected. Since 2014, I understood that while doing human rights work, I am able to do that only because there are other people at the front line, including some of my friends, who are buying me time to do that. They are defending me against the aggression so that I am able to do human rights activism. And this time I decided that it should be me who helps my colleagues in human rights movement in Ukraine to do what they have to do, while I'll be trying to protect them at the front line, even though I, of course, lacked experience and knowledge. And in springtime of 2022, it was a time when we didn't have an option of military training. Basically, we volunteered, and we had to go straight into combat zone. But there was another reason why I decided to volunteer, and even if it might sound as a paradox, it was specifically because I was called for many years of my life before that a human rights defender. I knew pretty well the human rights situation in Russia and in Russia-occupied territories. I have colleagues and friends in Russian human rights movement, and also among refugees whom I dealt with, there were people who had to flee from Russia due to their political views or their religious affiliations. So human rights situation in Russia deteriorated in front of my eyes, basically. And I knew pretty well that if Russia prevails on the occupied territories of Ukraine, there will be no human rights activism. There will be no human rights as a notion because it has no value, no importance in the contemporary ideology of the Russian world, the so-called Ruski Mir. And I thought to myself, if I'm called a human rights defender, then I have to defend human rights against the main, at the time, and still threat to human rights in Ukraine, which is Russian aggression, with means available. And the only option available to me at the time was to take up arms and resist Russian aggression. So basically, I never wanted to be a military, but I became a military specifically because I was a human rights defender. My platoon took part in the liberation of Kiev region. This was the first experience when we encountered the consequences of the occupation. We talked to people who spent 1 month at the time of the Russian occupation. We've seen the consequences of it. We were greeted as liberators, but this was the first time when we saw that laws of war or rules of war, we knew about that, but one thing is to know theoretically and another one is to see with your own eyes, are not observed by Russian occupiers. The extrajudicial killings of civilians, arbitrary arrests, and widespread looting and violence. This was something that people whom we liberated experienced for the whole months of Russian occupation. Unfortunately, within 3.5 months of me being at the service, me and 8 of my guys, we were captured by Russian forces in the east of the country. By that time, we were transferred to first Donetsk region and then Luhansk region. And next 2 years and 4 months I spent in Russian captivity. And within a couple of months' time, my captors decided it's not enough to keep me as a POW, as a prisoner of war. And they decided to fabricate a criminal case against me, accusing me of war crimes, which I've never committed. In the town I've never been to during wartime, but it didn't really matter. The whole case was absurd, but the court verdict was pre-written elsewhere. So they sentenced me to 13 years of imprisonment, and I was transferred to other part of the prison in Luhansk, and then sent to prison camp, to penal colony in Luhansk region, where I spent the rest of my time. In some points when it was difficult, I thought to myself that I had some sort of a field research trip in human rights, because basically suddenly I learned much more about, say, torture and human and degrading treatment, because unfortunately torture is a widespread and systematic practice used by Russian captors towards all who are kept in Russian captivity. Probably the most striking for me, sometimes we manage to have conversations with our captors, especially with some of the interrogators who were curious. Interrogations were not aimed at extracting any militarily important information from us. They very soon realized we don't possess any, but they were aimed at shaking our worldview, our system of values, the very core of our beliefs. And this is when it became so evident to me, something I guessed about before, but then it became obvious that this is not, of course, the war for territories. It was never a war for territories. Russia doesn't really need more territories. Russia is too big. It doesn't know what to do with its own territory, to be honest. It is not even the war, as we used to think quite often, that all wars are waged for resources. But Ukraine does not possess any resource which Russia needs so badly as to wage a full-scale aggression against Ukraine. This is a war of worldviews and values. Russia wants to be an empire, and there was never a Russian empire without Ukraine being part of it. Russia without Ukraine is not an empire. It's Moscow's Tsardom with attached lands. But it is a war of values, because what I came across in these conversations with first interrogators, and then those whom I was kept with, who were sentenced for criminal offenses, convicted for them, and who lived in the realm of Russian propaganda for many years, is a difference in worldview. Contemporary Russian ideology has the state as the value number one. The state is everything, and basically human being is disposable material. Human beings are disposable material. At some point we were forced to learn Russian anthem by heart and sing it on command, as well as we had to do a lot of things on command. Like if they wanted us to squat or to do push-ups or to sing or to shut up, they just ordered us to do so, and we had to obey under the threat of physical violence. So I know now a Russian anthem, which is not something I really wanted to do. But it is quite interesting, actually, and I mention it quite often because to me it was very illustrative. It is all about the state. It says about the state, the country, the fatherland, the motherland, about its might, about its vastness, its greatness, while human beings are mentioned once in the whole text of lyrics of the anthem, and it says, we are strong as long as we are loyal to the state. This is how it was, this is how it is, and this is how it will be forever. Нам силу дает наша верность отчизне, так было, так есть и так будет всегда. So it's not that the state is strong because we are loyal to it. No, we are strong as long as we are loyal to the state. And without the loyalty, we are powerless because the state is always there. And the whole contemporary Russian ideology is based upon this presumption that the state is the value number one, and it is embodied in the figure of national leader, of the ruler, who takes all the responsibility and makes all the vital decision making. And there can be nothing further from contemporary Ukrainian worldview. Because for the majority of Ukrainians, at least those whom I communicate with, and it's not only my human rights bubble, but also these are Ukrainian POWs whom I was in captivity with, human beings are value number one, people. People should be able to decide freely the course of their actions, together choose the path their country, their community will go to, and exercise their rights and freedoms, while the state is just a tool to achieve better life. For instance, among other questions my interrogators posed to me was about participation in Ukrainian revolutions, in particular in Maidan revolution. They couldn't understand it. They said, how comes you decided, you people, that you will go to the streets and change something? People cannot change anything. The authorities will have their way anyway, and we are just a material. We should be silent and obey, and thus will be fed and maybe not punished. And this is in stark contrast with what Ukrainians believe in. But this is also why those Ukrainians I know, including my brothers and sisters in arms who are currently at the front line, we believe that Ukraine defends much more than its territorial integrity or its national independence. Of course we do. But in this war of values, we defend certain worldview. We defend a set of values which is not uniquely Ukrainian, which is, we believe, shared by so many peoples around the globe, all people who want to live freely, in mutual dignity, in mutual respect towards each other's dignity, and without fear. So values such as human dignity and human agency, human rights are shared by so many people, and these values are under attack from Russia and its allies. This is why we believe that we defend much more than just Ukraine. And actually Russians, they don't hide the fact, especially in their propaganda shows, which I had to consume for quite some time. Since my conviction, I was transferred to the part of the prison where there was TV, and it's never switched off. So I had to watch all these Russian propaganda shows. First I was intrigued, it was interesting. Then I became bored, then it became irritating, but I had no say actually about what to watch. And they don't say that they wage a war against Ukraine. They say that they wage a war against collective West, against degraded liberal West, who for some reason is infected with this idea of human rights or human dignity. And the Russian soldier is ready to remind other countries what real traditional values are. And number one traditional value is obedience to the authorities. So this is why we believe that we defend much more than just Ukraine, and this is why we believe that international solidarity, without which we wouldn't be able to resist Russian full-scale aggression for 4 years now, is vital not only for us, but for all those who demonstrate this solidarity with us. I'll probably stop here. Thank you very much, and I'll be grateful for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Maksym. I'll ask a couple questions and then we can open things to the floor. I have a lot of questions I want to ask, but I'll make sure that there's time for everyone to ask as well. I'm not sure that everyone who showed up thinking that the title of this would be The Principle of Hope would understand exactly what they were in for and the story you just told. But The Principle of Hope is not just a random title, it's the title of a new initiative you have. Yeah. And I've read several of your interviews you've given since you regained your freedom, and you talk about, in almost all of them I think, the need to have hope. Can you tell us a little bit more about this initiative, what it does, and can you also tell us a little bit more about why we need to have hope in spite of all that you've been through and what you've just shared with us here today?
Well, the Principle of Hope, in more narrow terms, it's a title of a new organization which I co-founded together with my friend and colleague. It's a non-governmental organization, charity, Primarily nowadays we are preoccupied with assistance to those who were released from Russian captivity and their relatives. We prepare educational, informational materials for them, what to expect, what assistance they might get, but also for, say, medical personnel who deals with former captives, what to keep in mind when you deal with former POW or civilian detainee, because there are some specific reactions people demonstrate when they are released from captivity. For journalists, again, because there are many journalists interested in issues of captivity, but they also should keep in mind do no harm principle. But for us also it's principle of hope, because hope is something that keeps people alive in captivity, among other things. I was fortunate, I would say, because all people, all POWs or civilian detainees, sometimes in captivity they go through dark moments when they think, and we were held incommunicado until a certain moment. In my last year in captivity, I was held incommunicado. I didn't have any contact with my loved ones, with my relatives, with my family, with anyone in the outside world. So in this situation, later on I was allowed letter writing, but it was in the last several months of my captivity. Before that it was not the case. So in this situation it is easy sometimes to fall into the, not despair, but thoughts that no one remembers about you, no one cares about you, that you are forgotten. And this is provoked by the guards as well. They told us all of the time, you are disposable material, you were used and forgotten, no one is going to liberate you from here, etc. I was fortunate because I never had these dark moments. I never lost hope. I put all my trust in my people, those whom I love, those whom I worked with, that shared my life with, that they keep remembering about me, talking about me, thinking about me, and that sooner or later I will be liberated. Although I didn't know that it would happen that soon. I thought that I might be one of the last ones to go out. It turned out differently. And when I was liberated, talking to my friends and colleagues, they asked me what is the most important thing to remember in captivity, or to think in captivity. And I responded that the most important thing is to know that you are not forgotten. That there are people out there who think about you and fight for you, for your release. This is why we developed these symbols of, and you can see here, symbols of solidarity with POWs. But hope is something that keeps people going. And the same can be said about Ukraine nowadays, because this is a war of attrition. And of course, resources of Russia are incomparable to resources of Ukraine. Without hope, we wouldn't be able to repel Russian aggression at its initial stage, when Ukraine was given several weeks' time, basically, by most of international commentators. We're able to resist this aggression for 4 years now. Of course, it is very difficult, and currently Ukraine is at the very difficult stage. But it is an existential war. It is a war for survival of Ukraine and Ukrainians as a community. So we put our hope in our values, in our ability to resist, our ability to withstand and to be resilient despite everything. So hope is a key, probably one of the key notions currently in Ukraine.
Hope is one topic that I wanted to ask you about. Another is freedom. You've spoken in your interviews as well that being held captive made you learn things about the concept of freedom, which is often understood in these abstract, fuzzy ways, but it becomes much more concrete when you're held prisoner. So can you tell us a little bit more about freedom? And it's interesting, too, that you mentioned the Russian national anthem, which does not mention individuals, but the Ukrainian national anthem talks about freedom a lot.
Yeah, Ukrainian national anthem has freedom at its chorus, that will sacrifice our body and our soul for our freedom. So freedom is the main concept in Ukrainian national anthem. When I was in captivity, one of those mental practices which helped me was to try to think, my first degree is in philosophy. It was a long time ago. It was at the end of last millennia. but I think it's not a profession. It's a state of mind, or it's a diagnosis. I don't know. You name it. You call it. And I try to think about certain main notions, main concepts, phenomena we were dealing with. And one of the first things I realized was that I misunderstood violence. Because to me, violence, as to many people, was about inflicting physical harm upon someone else. But I found myself in a situation where, which made it clear that violence is about stripping other person of his or her own agency, basically turning them into an object. There was an atmosphere of fear and violence created in that special wing of prison in Luhansk, which made it possible to turn us into objects. When we were told to sing the anthem, we had to sing the anthem. When we were told to stand up straight, we had to stand up straight and stand there for hours, or to do sit-ups, or to say something, or to shut up. Basically, you turn another person into an object which doesn't have any control over his or her own actions and what happens to him or to her in the next minutes or hours or days. So freedom as the opposite became very tangible, as a possibility to make choices, to have preferences, and to influence one's own future, what to do, but primarily to make choices, what to do and what not to do. This is relevant to me not only to individuals, but also to communities, to Ukrainians as a community, to different communities of Ukrainians, ability to make choices and influence what will happen to us tomorrow. And this was a stark contrast with worldview which I encountered among Russians and among those who lived for a long time under Russian occupation. They believe that they don't have any say in what happens to them tomorrow. They basically told me that, we don't choose how we live, but therefore we don't bear any responsibility for what we do. Everything is decided up there by our rulers. They have the choice. They are the decision makers, and they bear all the responsibility. And to me, of course, it was a trick, because I believe that responsibility stays with people. And it's responsibility not only for what they do, but also for what they don't do, for avoidance of actions. So to me, freedom, is a key notion, and it's very tangible, especially after captivity, when you are liberated, and suddenly you can make choices, starting with everyday life choices, what to wear, what to drink, what to eat, where to go, to talk to someone or to keep silent, and ending with strategy for your life. What are the senses? What you want to implement, whom you want to become. This is all very tangible. Freedom feels like the main, after liberation, the main value, probably after love. Yeah.
You made a choice in February 2022 to serve on the front lines. We certainly now know why you made that choice and the reasons behind it. On the screen and in the advertisement for this talk are images by Davyd Chychkan, a Ukrainian artist who you knew, who also shared some of these values.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Davyd, who he was, and why he's such a perfect representation, visual representation for the things we've talked about already?
Yeah, Davyd Chychkan, he was a Ukrainian artist. He preferred not to call himself artist. He preferred to say, I'm a drawer. I'm just the one who draws pictures. He was very critical about artistic establishment and didn't want art to be some kind of specialized profession. He believed that art belongs to everyone. He comes from anarchist milieu, anti-authoritarian and anti-fascist. So in his drawings, one can find legendary figures from Ukrainian anarchist movement of 20th century, as well as his friends who were serving at the front line, because a lot of people from anti-fascist circles, they joined Ukrainian army, as well as people of all other political affiliations and beliefs. People talk about Ukrainian military. The vast majority of the defense forces of Ukraine, at the moment, they are not professional military, and they never wanted to be professional military. These are teachers and journalists and farmers and construction workers and taxi drivers who had to join the armed forces in order to defend their country and their loved ones, but they never wanted to before. So basically they're civilians who had to wear military uniform, and they are a reflection of Ukrainian society, and the line between Ukrainian society and its army is very blurred at the moment. This is why there is such a huge volunteer movement, people supporting the armed forces, gathering money constantly, buying things and supplying Ukrainian troops. So there were a lot of people whom Davyd knew, and some of them I knew, who went to defend Ukraine. And he himself, despite his frail health, underwent some medical treatment, and he joined the armed forces of Ukraine. And unfortunately, last year he passed away. He was killed in combat by Russians. Since then, his paintings, his drawings, which depict all of these people whom you can see at the drawings, they are individuals. They have names, so they are someone whom he knew personally. Some of them passed away, being killed in combat. Some of them are still alive. Some of them are my friends as well. And now exhibitions of his drawings can be found in different places. Like 2 days ago, another one was opened in Harvard University in Boston, which Davyd would be very happy for, of course.
I have many more questions I could ask you, Maksym. I do want to keep the time and make sure we're done at 5:45. So I definitely want to now open the floor to questions from the audience. I hope there are several. And if it flags, I'll ask more questions. But I already see hands up there. Next to Nick, you had your hand up first.
During your 3 months in service, did you experience any stories, memoirs, or moments of the lives of Ukrainian citizens in the Russian-occupied areas that deserve to be told due to the restriction of information from the Russian government to the outside world?
Well, we've heard a lot of stories about the cruelty of Russian soldiers. And it's of course something that doesn't come to Russian media or Russian-controlled media. We were present in the direction of now, unfortunately, internationally infamous places like Bucha and Irpin. We were not at those places themselves, so we didn't witness the mass executions and these mass graves. But the villages we were to had their stories. And yeah, one of the constant repeated stories was the story of widespread looting, which Russian soldiers left after them. They basically took everything valuable, or what they considered to be valuable, from washing machines to women's lingerie, for some reason. That's something that really surprised locals, to put it mildly. So, yeah, there were a lot of stories of this kind.
Thank you. Right here.
What is the best way that we can do as like an international community to help support Ukraine, where we know that this money or whatever else we do will actually go to the people of Ukraine and not be stolen or anything else?
Yeah, well, being anti-militarist in my worldview and a human rights defender, I should say that, of course, we need arms. This is what Ukrainian human rights defenders nowadays say. This is what makes us a little bit special. But arms supplies and this sort of assistance is vital, of course. Military assistance. Then we understand that economically Ukraine is still able to survive due to international assistance. Of course, it is true. But the war, it seems like it will go on until it becomes too expensive for Russia to wage. So economic pressure upon Russia, sanctions and other means of economic pressure, fighting shadow fleet of Russian oil tankers. All this serves not to destruction of Russia per se, but to end of the war. Because as long as Russia can wage this war, it will wage it. This is what we see at the moment. And also, of course, quite a lot of human rights defenders, not only in Ukraine but internationally, are now preoccupied with an issue of bringing those responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity in the occupied territories to justice, not only via international mechanisms but via universal jurisdiction, etc. And this needs coordinated international efforts, so this is also an important thing. To me, it is important not to lose when it comes to possible peace talks or talks about ceasefire or whatever you call it, not to lose human component of it. There is an international campaign of Ukrainian and international human rights organizations called People First. It's about humanitarian aspect being number one in any peace negotiations, in particular release of all civilian detainees and exchange of all POWs should not be the result of negotiations but the prerequisite to it. And it also would be a test to see how serious Russia is about the talks, because if it refuses to do this, it means they don't take the talks seriously, and this is what we see at the moment. So put the pressure upon Russia to release civilian detainees, which should not be in detention in the first place, and to move closer liberation of POWs. And also what is important is to ensure independent monitoring of the conditions POWs are held in. Because we didn't have any independent observation of places where we've been to. We were waiting for International Committee of Red Cross, for instance, for some time. Then we stopped waiting for them. Then we started making jokes about waiting for them, of course. So, but we were told by our interrogators, I was told more than once, no one knows the conditions you are held in, and no one has access to you, which basically means we can do to you whatever we want. And you know that we'll do if you don't cooperate. So lack of independent international monitoring is also something that provokes cruel treatment. So there are a lot of things, and also manifestations of individual solidarity with people of Ukraine. You know, actually, it means psychologically a lot to people as well.
If I could jump in briefly, and if someone wants to right this very second on their phone, actually donate money with knowing that it'll go somewhere good. The largest charity organization operating on behalf of Ukraine right now is Razom, R-A-Z-O-M. They do all kinds of things, including sponsor visits of people like Maksym, not Maksym specifically. We're going to screen a movie 2 weeks from tomorrow, 2,000 meters from Andriivka, which I hope people will look at the Havel Center's website and go to. An extraordinary, moving film that is being sponsored by Razom for Ukraine. And if you want an even local Miami connection, a Miami alumnus founded a charity organization called Ukrainian Action. It operates out of London. They supply generators, bandages, and other materials, and they drive them in donated jeeps and trucks from London to the Polish-Ukrainian border just about once a month over the weekend. You leave on Friday and you arrive on Sunday night. So these are two things you can actually give money to right now. Dylan, you had your hand up. Yeah, please.
What Ukrainian historical individuals do you look up to and why?
Say again, what Ukrainian?
Historical individuals, so like what, somebody who I guess who would you say influenced you the most?
Oh, that's not an easy question. I would say there are a lot of prominent figures in Ukraine's fight for freedom over centuries. I mentioned Nestor Makhno before, the leader of the largest peasant anarchist republic during the civil war in Ukraine. And he was less of a thinker. He was more of a practitioner. Yeah, the fact that this republic was in Ukrainian lands, and his army was called Ukrainian Insurgent Army of Ukraine. It also gives kind of a hint how deeply Ukrainians tend to be kind of anarchists. It is said by a lot of people, both Ukrainians and from the outside. They are very skeptical and critical when it comes to the state authorities, and they value their freedom a lot. We were asked a lot by our interrogators what we think about the leaders of interwar and during the Second World War nationalist Ukrainian movement. So people who fought in Ukrainian Insurgent Army against Nazis and then against Soviets are now quite often mentioned as heroes. Although I should say that the leaders of that movement ideologically are not close to me. That was one of those kinds of nationalism which were between the First and Second World War in Europe quite popular, not only in Europe though, which tend to be rather authoritarian, which is not very typical for Ukraine. Ukrainians are not good at authoritarianism for some reason. But their dedication to fight for freedom is commendable, of course. And Ukrainian dissidents, they influenced a lot, me including, those who in Soviet Union time, after the Second World War, in 60s and 70s and 80s, fought non-violently for civil liberties, for human rights, Ukrainian Helsinki group. They almost all of them went to jail and spent there many years. I know some of them personally, those who survived. And their dedication to notions of human dignity and human rights and freedom again, they were a big influence for me. Yeah, especially this last group, probably.
Thank you.
Nestor Makhno is in the clouds, by the way, in the poster for this.
Yeah.
Steve, there's a hand over.
Naya, yes. Is that who? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I can't see very well to
Hi,
my...
Maksym. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. You've shared very extremely vulnerable stories, and that means a lot. My question is, you mentioned sort of Russian propaganda TV. I want to know, what do these look like? Like, what were the caricatures being shown to you? What was sort of like, what would you say is the sort of thematic emblemization of Russia through these sort of TV shows?
Well, Russian propaganda system turned out to be more sophisticated than I expected it to be.
Okay.
One thing to remember is that main media in Russia is still television. Television is the media number one. These are not online resources, this is television, good old-fashioned TV. And there are different TV channels, but they are all controlled by the state, either directly or via state monopolies like Gazprom. And they have different formats. So it depends, and the messages are tailor-made for different audiences. If one wants to believe official propaganda, he or she turns to the main TV channel. If this is too blunt and too unsophisticated, then there is a TV channel which is kind of more for middle class, and with its own show which pretends to be more intellectual. They even allow certain degree of discussions among the participants of the TV show. For instance, they discuss certain Russian film about the Great Patriotic War, which was screened, and they have discussion if this film patriotic enough. So this is a degree of hot public debate reflected on that television. Then there are entertainment TV channels for those who don't want to listen about war. Of course, war is not called war, just remember that. In Russia, what is going on is called special military operation for 4 years now. And the one who says publicly that it is a war that Russia wages is actually going to jail. Because there is an article in criminal code spreading fakes about Russian army. And Russian army does not wage wars. It just conducts special military operations. The narratives are the same. They're just packaged in different ways. The first narrative is that Russia, of course, is rising. It is strong and will be even stronger. It never meant any harm to anyone, but it is surrounded by enemies. So this is psychology of the besieged fortress, basically. And the enemy number one is this collective West. Before it was headed by the US. Nowadays, according to monitoring, Europe replaced the US as the enemy number one. And now on the US, the coverage is much more ambiguous. Then that Russia has some form of special form of democracy. This wording was coined years before the full-scale invasion, sovereign democracy. So it is a democracy which basically leads to autocratic rule, where the elections, I haven't met any single person in captivity, would it be among my co-inmates or among the guards or among interrogators, who took elections seriously. Everyone knows in advance what the results will be. But this is a form of democracy we have, they said. We don't really have a choice anyway. Then, of course, the West, would it be Europe or the United States, is in decay. And it happened due to liberal values in the first place. All that freedom of choice and multi-party democracy, of course immigration and social inequality, a lot of things, what is usually done is that some real social issues are picked up and they are exaggerated and overblown, but it is presented as if Russia doesn't have them. Well, of course, Russia does, big time. And when it comes to Ukraine specifically, the whole system of propaganda, it's not constructed rationally. So it's very difficult to have reasonable, rational discussion about it. It all mostly is built upon the feeling of belonging. Belonging to great superpower, belonging to great nation, fulfilling historical duty, this sort of thing. So some parts of propaganda can contradict another part. For instance, Ukraine does not exist as an independent entity. Ukraine is not a state, it is a failed state, it is a puppet state ruled by Americans, now it is ruled by Europeans, it is ruled by gays, and by Nazis.
Oh,
It's all at the same time, and I'm not joking.
interesting.
So Ukraine does not exist, but it is ruled by Nazis, which oppress Russian-speaking population, which are Russophobic, and they resist Russian army for 4 years. Well, when I was in there for 2 years, while they don't exist as an independent entity. It's not rational. It's extremely contradictory, but it doesn't really matter. Everyone picks the more comfortable version of the truth. Basically, the overall Russian propaganda is built upon several presumptions. One of them is that there is no truth. Well, the truth is what the state says is true. Would it be regarding history? For instance, Ukraine never existed as an independent entity. Would it be about the contemporary state of affairs, like there is no war, and what is happening in its special military operation? The state has monopoly to truth. Everything else is a matter of interpretation. When before the Russian full-scale invasion, you might remember there was an incident when a passenger airplane was shot down in the skies over eastern Ukraine, shot down by Russians.
Right.
Russian propaganda straight away advanced several conflicting theories what happened. That it was shot down by Ukrainian Air Force, it was shot down by Ukrainian missile, it has just fallen. And they all advanced them at the very same time. So it's not to create a feeling that we know the truth. It's to create a feeling that we'll never know the truth. And in this environment where we'll never know the truth, everything is not one-dimensional. It's a bit too complicated for us to understand. The ultimate entity which has a say in what is true and what is not is the Russian state.
Yeah.
So this is how Russian propaganda works, if in brief.
Thank you.
Other, more specifically, like other Eastern European countries like Belarus, Poland, Czech Republic, or did the Russian propaganda when you were in prison not say anything about them?
It didn't say much. Well, Belarus, which is currently de facto occupied by Russia because Russians entered it for common military exercise and Russian troops never left. Basically, they're just stationed there. But Belarusian ruler, Lukashenko, he's totally dependent upon Russia and he understands it. So Belarus is basically treated as a younger brother, you know, part of the family. Basically, Belarusians, they're Russians. They're kind of special branch of Russians. And it is the same said about Ukrainians, that Ukrainians are actually Russians. They just have forgotten about it. They don't want to recognize it. So Russian soldiers will remind them that they're spoiled Russians, spoiled by the West, of course, and by all those external influences. On Poland, it's much more difficult because with Poland, Russia, since its imperial time, has very difficult history. And of course, Poland is accused of being Russophobic and also ruled by Americans. You guys don't even believe how many countries are ruled by Americans, even if America doesn't know about it. Although it is interesting to observe if a certain pro-Russian or anti-Ukrainian political forces advance in political landscape, how the tone of coverage changes, like it happened with Hungary, of course. Hungary, being part of the European Union, still is not criticized because it's headed by pro-Russian politician, by pro-Russian leader. But mostly, of course, countries which are covered in the EU, old EU countries like France and Germany, the UK on separate track, and the US. They have most of attention from Russian propaganda. But again, my experience is a bit outdated because I was liberated in October 2024. Since then, I don't watch Russian propaganda. I have a privilege not to do that. But I read sometimes monitoring of Russian media.
I can guarantee you it hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Other questions? Scott, go ahead, and then we'll have you first, Scott.
I was wondering if you could say more about how Russians treated their Ukrainian prisoners. When we read Solzhenitsyn or something like this, we know what the Soviet prisons were like. So, you know, in terms of how people were treated and things like that. But more specifically, you said about how the interrogators were particularly interested in your sort of worldview, your values, and your participation in kind of key moments in Ukraine and stuff. And I'm wondering, did they try to change that? Did they try to tear down those values? How did they respond?
Yeah, starting from the latter, they tried to change it. They tried to challenge it and to change it. And I would say that they had playbooks according to which they developed every conversation. For instance, they tried to force POWs to admit that Ukraine is a corrupt country to an extent which makes it dysfunctional. So they asked, for instance, a former farmer or driver, has he ever encountered cases of corruption? And the guy said yes. So you admit that Ukraine is a corrupt country. And there is no right answer to it because it is generalization. Or they asked did you vote for Zelensky at presidential elections? Yes or no? If one said yes, then how did you vote for the clown, former comedian? And look where he's got you to war. So now you understand that it was a stupid thing to do. If the guy said no, why are you then fighting and dying for him? What is your attitude towards him? Or about Ukrainian rich people, why are you a cannon fodder for oligarchs? As if Russians don't have oligarchs. And they were uncomfortable when these lines were cut off. For instance, when they asked me if I voted for Zelensky, I said no, because it's true. And they asked what is then my attitude towards him. And I said that my attitude towards him is an attitude of an officer of Ukrainian Armed Forces towards my supreme commander at times of war. And I'm not interested in anything else. And that kind of cut it. Or they asked me what I think about the families of the richest people in Ukraine not fighting. And I said I don't care because I have my own responsibility. I'm not trying to figure out who is fighting and who is not. I don't have any information on that, so I cannot confirm it or deny it. But I know that this is my responsibility. And what I do is in the realm of my responsibility. And the others will bear their own responsibility. And sometimes it made them angry, actually, because they tried to shake the worldview, they tried to force to admit it, and it didn't really work. On the treatment overall, well, the guards, most of the guards were local collaborators, because it was in the occupied part of Ukraine, in the old occupied part of Ukraine since 2014. But interrogators were almost all of them were Russians. And the treatment by the guards was different, but overall atmosphere, as I mentioned, was of fear and violence. The toughest were the first several months. Basically, we didn't have anything. We had our shoes been taken off on our way to Luhansk, because apparently Ukrainian military shoes are better than Russian ones. So Russian soldiers took them from us. And for the next several months, we were wearing socks. We were fed, but the food was scarce and of really bad quality, so feeling of hunger was constant. Of course, we didn't have any hygienic items. We didn't have toilet paper. We didn't have anything. Of course, we didn't have anything to write with or to read. It's out of question. So basically, and we were never taken out for walks, as usually inmates are. So we were just staying in our cells, hungry, dirty, wearing socks, and trying to keep physically and mentally fit with different techniques. Later on it started to change, and especially after my conviction. When I was convicted by the court, I was transferred to the other part of the prison, as I mentioned, and the conditions were better. So those who were accused of criminal offenses were fed much better. They were not beaten. They were not forced to squat or do push-ups or to sing Russian anthem or to stand up straight in the morning and in the night when there is Russian anthem played on radio. And it started to be different. But the first initial several months were the toughest, probably.
We have time for two more questions, one in the back, and then if there's someone else who wants to ask it, please. Kevin, you'll get the last one. Please.
You mentioned that you believe this is a war of values, especially for Russia. Do you believe that those values originated recently, or are they a continuation of some previous line of thinking?
I would like to say that they originated recently because that would give hope that they might change quickly back, but I'm afraid, no, I don't believe that. I believe that these values were present in Russian society for a very long time. This model of authoritarian rule, where the ruler is the only one who has the agency and takes vital decisions. It goes from Russian imperial times. Basically, there was there were several pauses, like in 90s, where it could be hoped that Russian society turns in a different way, but actually Vladimir Putin is the product of 90s as well. He is not, I really don't believe when some of Russian opposition politicians and immigration, they say it's the regime which is bad, but people are okay, people are fine. And so it leads, of course, to the notion that bad regime should be replaced with good regime and everything would be fine. I don't think so, because Putin became a reflection of a demand from a big section of Russian population. There was big resentment after the collapse of Soviet Union and economic hardships of 90s. Once, when I was already in this other part of prison with TV, there was a film, a historical documentary shown on one of Russian TV channels about history of German Weimar Republic between the First and the Second World War, actually between the First World War and the rise of Nazis to power. And the way they talked about resentment and economic hardships and looking for scapegoats and hopes for authoritarian leader to come and solve all the problems and take away all the responsibility, inevitably it reminded me of Russia of 90s and 2000s to an incredible extent. So I believe that this is something that Russian society bred for some time. Not only this, of course, but these dark forces, they became embodied in contemporary Russian regime, which reflects certain demand from Russian society, at least big part of it. I would love to my answer to be different, but yeah, this is how I see it now. And before my captivity, I thought, I had hope. I remember I had a discussion before the full-scale invasion, a few years before that, with a friend of mine, a scholar, who is Russian, but he lives outside of Russia for many years now. And I told him, look, but at some point Russia can be democratic again. It can be better. And he told me, you don't understand anything because you are not Russian. No, Russia can never be different. It should cease to exist in its current form as this entity. And this is when we have hope. And I said it's ironic that he is Russian. I'm trying to convince him that, it can be better, and he says no. But apparently nowadays I really think that at least for peace of Russian neighbors, the safest scenario, not in the nearest time of course, but Russia to change its form and maybe cease to exist in its current form, having confederation of independent entities in its place or something else, but not authoritarian monster it is at the moment.
Kevin, please.
This feels like a weird question to end it on, but I'm curious, there was at least some foreign fighters that went to Ukraine to join international brigades or international legions. I know they've been criticized sometimes as like adventure tourists. I'm curious if you interacted with any of them, what your opinion is on people who did this.
I didn't have a chance to interact with any of them, no, so I don't have any personal experience. But I should say that overall, Ukrainian community, Ukrainian society has a lot of respect to all international fighters. They are commended on very different levels. Would they be Americans, or would they be French, British, or Colombians, for that matter? Actually, quite a lot of Colombians are fighting for Ukraine at the moment. So they're not only fighting in the International Legion, but also in some other brigades. And yes, what I encountered when there is a discussion about it is gratitude from Ukrainians.
Kevin, I'm going to send someone, Dr. Fantoni here, to tell you more about this. Let me say to the audience, it takes at least 2 days, often 3 days, to travel out of Ukraine because Ukraine's a country at war. If you want to go abroad, it took Maksym 3 days, to travel to America. You have to take a train out of Ukraine into Poland usually, then you have to wait for a plane, and then you have to wait for another plane. Maksym went to Harvard University, as he mentioned before. He travels tomorrow to go to Illinois, to go to the University of Illinois, and then the University of Illinois Chicago, before making the slow but eventual journey back to Ukraine by way of Munich. All that is a way of saying it's a real honor and a pleasure, and we are honored to be one of the stops on this tour, and for you to come and speak to us about these incredibly important topics. So thank you, Maksym, and
Thank
please
you
join
very
me in
much.
thanking him.
Thank you.